Guitar Collector Guy presents new clothes for an old friend. Assemble the pickguard with all of the electronics. I've built a lot of different Stratocasters and Telecasters, well, just guitars over the years, and you accumulate parts. I've had this green Telecaster body with a 2-point tremolo on it, and I've not been able to identify the exact name or color of the green. I think it's like a seafoam green. It also might be a Mystic Surf green. I don't know. I mean, there's so many different types of greens or variations that Fender has. But ever since that I saw Stranger Than Friction, which is a really, really good Will Ferrell movie, and he plays a seafoam green old beat up Stratocaster, I've kind of wanted one. And so I've hung on to this body for a while. And then over a period of time, I finally picked up all the parts. I had a set of Fender 5762 pickups. I had everything to build out the electronics, a neck, and so on. So I decided that I would go ahead and do it on this. So here you see me kind of inspecting everything to build out the electronics. A really good set of instructions. The only thing that the instructions are kind of missing are two ground wires that you'll see me add at the end of the wiring build, but everything's there. I quickly, and this is kind of why I'm using the word quickly, because I made a mistake. I go and I put the screws and the little rubber tubing over the screws, and you'll see at one point where I actually put the screw in the wrong hole, and I catch it later on and pull it apart and put it back together, and there I go, like an idiot. I put it in the wrong hole, but that's what happens when you're moving really, really quick and not really paying attention to what you're doing. So these are great pickups. They're pretty much clones or copies of the original series of Stratocasters, ranging from about 57 to 62. Great tone. I decided with this guitar that I was going to have, I don't normally go with the tortoiseshell pickguard and Trem cover, but I thought it'd be kind of cool with this green. I don't know why. I had seen another Telecaster done this way, and I thought that it would be neat. And so I went ahead and ordered the pickguard for it. So it's a brand new pickguard. It's got the plastic still on it. I have a habit of leaving the plastic on until I'm all done doing the assembly and stuff, so I don't scratch or mess up the pickguard. I'm not really setting the pickup height or anything when I'm putting this together. I'm just assembling it so then I can actually go ahead and build out the wire. This is another one of those Art of Tone kits, and it's just basically their basic standard, but it's a really high quality component based kit. And I find that these are great kits, very economical in my opinion. They cost about half of what it's going to cost you to buy something that's already prefabbed of the same quality. And it's kind of cool to be able to build something out yourself and then play it and know that you actually took the time to build it. The kit comes with 3 250K CTS pots, 0.22 microfarad orange cap, 5-way switch, and then I didn't used to like the pushback wiring because I kind of prefer for the smaller jobs, because of my big kind of potato fingers, like 22 gauge braided wire. So I kind of did a blend here. You can see on my bench at the top I've got some red and black wire that I use, and I decided to use the white and the black pushback wiring that they gave on things like, you know, shielded grounds and so on, and then to use for the smaller stuff the red and black wires. And so I also, you saw at the beginning, I drew out a diagram so you could see in a numbered fashion as I go through the project what I'm doing, and you'll see each numbered step as I'm going through and actually building out the wiring structure, the wiring capacity. And that's pretty much it. I'm really excited about putting this guitar together. This body, to me, for it's beat up. It's been through a lot. Somebody took it and actually filled holes with wood putty on it and then sanded it out. But to me, it just kind of adds to the character of it. And then the paint and finish is starting to crackle. And I don't know, it's just, to me, it's very cool looking, and I thought it would make a really, really nice and probably great sounding guitar once I was done. Step 1, capacitor installation. So in the diagram, you can see in step 1, arrow pointing to the 0.22 cap. I used the cap actually to do some of the ground wiring. So I saw someone else to do this, and I thought it was a pretty good trick. So you'll kind of watch as I feed through the leg there on the volume. And so part of the diagram shows that you're supposed to have, let's see, the cap go to ground on the tone pot, to the bottom leg there on the tone pot. So it's supposed to be soldered to the top of that tone pot as well. Then it goes across and it goes to the bottom pin of the volume pot. And then there's supposed to be then a wire that, or the actual connector itself, that goes to the ground on the back of the 250K volume pot. And so what I decided to use is the really long legs of the capacitor to actually replace some of the wires themselves. And so I soldered there, and then I'll solder on here on the back of the top tone pot onto ground. And my soldering iron was just kind of warming up. It's kind of cold in my garage. It was only about 45 degrees. Once my soldering iron warms up, I went back and touched up some of my large blob solders and made them flow properly so they weren't cold solder joints. Next, I solder the leg onto the bottom pin of the volume pot, and then I solder also onto the back of that volume pot to ground. So, and you can actually match this against the circuit and see that this replaces a wire and so on. And then I take a pair of cutters and I clip off the excess ends, and it's a nice clean looking circuit then. Step 2, install ground wire. So in the diagram, you can see the two with the arrow pointing to a ground wire that runs between the two tone cots, and it is soldered to a glob of solder on the back of each of the 250K tone pots. So here, for these types of jobs, I'm using the 22 gauge black and red wire that I have on hand. I'm using a wire stripper to strip off the ends, not a lot. And then I do two things. I twist the ends of the wire, and then I do what's called tenning, where you basically flow solder onto the braided tips, and you'll see me do it here. And what it does is it makes your soldering jobs a lot easier as you're then getting the solder to flow between whatever you're trying to connect the wire to. The solder heats up on the wire that's already there and really quickly connects and bonds with the solder point that you're actually trying to solder the wire to. So here I've finished tenning the wire, And now I'm going to do a solder point on back of the two 250K tone pots, and then I'm going to connect the wire between the 2 points. If you like this video, please click on like, subscribe, and notify. Step 3, input jack hot wire. So in the diagram, you can see the red line pointed to by the 3, where we're going to run from the center pot of the volume 250K pot down to the outside of the output jack. Simple to do, and then there's going to be a ground that runs from one of the back of the pots to the other part of the jack as well. For both the hot line as well as the ground to the output jack, I am using the supplied, and watch, see when I push back on the shielding, you don't actually have to strip it. You just push back on it and it exposes. That's where it gets its name from. It's actually kind of cool. It's starting to grow on me. Other than the fact that it's kind of hard for me to maneuver in small jobs. But for this type of work, it's perfect. You've got a long line that's running from one point on the volume knob to the connector on the output jack. And it's a perfect setup for that. So. Now we're doing the other side of the job, step 4, the input jack ground. So I feel bad because in the wiring diagram I show the ground going to the output jack coming from the back of the center tone pot. In reality, I actually then soldered it from the back of the volume pot to the input connector as well. To be honest, this will actually work. It just has to go from a ground to the input jack. You can, maybe not necessarily have the grounds in the exact positions, as long as it's all grounded the way it's supposed to be. Like in this case, it'll still function properly. Not the same with hot wires. So just something to note that I did kind of make a mistake, but really didn't. But I decided to call out and show you what I did differently from the diagram. Step 5, small jumper between tone 1 and tone 2. In this case, you can see kind of a big red, thick red wire that I've kind of annotated. Step 5, where I'm going to the middle of the bottom tone pot to the outer right of the middle tone pot. And so I'm again using my 22 gauge wire, red this time, because it is not a ground. So for all the ground wires with the 22 gauge, I use black. And for basically the non-ground wires, I use red. And again, I'm going to trim off the ends using the wire stripper. I'm going to tend this, even though it's a really, really small wire. You can see me here in the upper right hand corner of the screen doing that, and then I'll go ahead and install it by soldering it in place. So I've talked about soldering before, and again, this isn't going to be one of those where I'm teaching you how to solder, but the idea is you put the soldering iron on the wire and the posts that you're soldering to, and you can see I'm trying to angle around so I don't melt any of the insulation on any of the other wires, but then you kind of feed then the solder not onto the soldering iron but onto what you've heated up. The solder spreads out. When it's done, it should be full coverage, no holes, should be a nice shiny appearance and smooth, and not kind of mottled and dull looking, because that potentially actually will cause problems, and you might have a broken circuit at that point because the wire is not actually conducting through the solder. Step 6, tone to 5-way switch. So in the diagram, the 6 is pointing to the bottom tone, far left. I go up and you can see it going to the right-hand side, second up from the bottom conductor on the switch. I'm going to use some red 22 gauge braided wire. I'm this time going in and I'm actually kind of cheating a little bit by putting some solder in place first, then heating it up and then feeding the 10 wire into it and then kind of blowing on it to let it cool quickly. And then I do the same thing with the post on the 5-way switch. I think if I recall in this, I didn't put enough solder on it, so I ultimately, once I feed the wire through, I end up having to put a little bit more solder on it to complete. Yep. And of course the wire falls out, but it's fine. I just heat it up again and feed it through, and all is good. That step is complete. Step 7, tone to 5-way switch. In the diagram, you can see the 7 pointing to the middle of the peg of the middle tone to the bottom right-hand peg on the 5-way switch. I do it exactly the same thing. I've got cut off a little bit of 22 gauge wire. I 10 both ends of the red. I'm filling in the holes right now with some solder. And then when I heat those up, it'll be really easy to feed the 10 wire into those and really make a nice connection. Step 8, volume to switch, and then a small jumper on the switch. Step 8 is kind of a two-step, 2 wires. I go from the left tab of the volume pot over to the top right-hand pot, or tab on the 5-way switch. Then I do a small jumper all the way around to the top row bottom on the 5-way switch. Again, I'm using the red 22 gauge wire. I've cut off the pieces the length that I want them to be. I've kind of twisted the braided at the ends, and here I am tinning the wire before I go ahead and install it. One thing that I'm going to invest in is kind of the clip circuit and wire holders, which will make the job for me a lot easier when I'm doing these types of builds, and I won't have to kind of use in an ad hoc fashion things like wire clippers and stuff like that to do this type of work. It'll just make it a lot easier. Step 9, white wire from the bridge pickup. So in step 9, you can see here in the diagram, the yellow line representing white wire is coming from the bridge pickup, goes down and is soldered then to the inside row, very top, as shown in the diagram. So I'm nearing the end of the wiring part of the project. Now I'm going to actually use the wires that are built into the pickups. So when you look at the back of this pickguard, the pickup that's the top is your neck pickup, the middle is obviously the middle, and the bottom is your bridge pickup. So the first one we're going to work on is the bridge pickup. I don't want all that wire hanging around inside of the body of the guitar. I'd like this to be cleaner than what I did in my last project that I showed you all building a wiring harness for the Telecaster. So I'm actually measuring the wire out, cutting it to length, and then soldering it in place. Step 10, white wire to middle pickup. So in this step, almost identical to the last step, I take the white wire from the middle pickup and bring it down, and in the top row of connectors on the back of the switch, I solder it to the bottom connector down from the top. Again, that's a lot of excess wire. They've given you a lot to work with, so I kind of measure out as though it's going down through the channel and then over, and I cut off the unnecessary amount, and then I push back on the shielding, and then I basically set it up to solder. Actually, this wire, to be honest with you, the more I use it, the more it's actually, for stuff like this, easy to use. Kind of limited number of tools that you need to do a good job. Step 11, white wire neck pickup. So in this step, I take the white wire off the neck pickup and I put it on the third connector on the top of the 5-way switch down as in the diagram. Step 12, all 3 black wires to ground. From this point, I'm basically going to take all 3 of the black wires and solder them to the back of the tone pot. So you can see I've got all the white wires soldered on to the 5-way switch. Now I'm going to take all of the 3 black wires coming off of each of the pickups, the neck, middle, and bridge pickups, going to cut them to length, going to push back, twist them together, and then you can see right now I'm building a solder joint on the back of the volume pot, and I'm going to then solder them all 3 to the back of that volume pot and complete the circuit there. Step 13, install the input jack. So in the circuit here, you can see that I'm going to run a hot line from the middle of the volume pot, and I'm going to go a ground on the back of the tone pot to the input jack. And the difference between doing the Telecaster project and this is this you basically do the wiring before. And so you basically run the wires through the body and then solder them onto the back of the input jack. You can see me assembling the input jack here to the cover. And then I'm going to put the almost completely done pickguard, populated pickguard, and then feed the 2 pushback braided or non-braided wires through, and then solder them on. The other thing I did in this that I wish I had done a little bit better is I left a little bit too much wire on, and so when I push this down, it's not going to cause any problems, but it's just not as clean as it could be. And so I've got a lot of wire bunched in there behind the input jack. Step 14, install the 2 ground wires. So this is where I was talking about this wasn't in the diagram. Not only was it not on the diagram for the pickups, but it also wasn't in the wiring diagram for the wiring harness kit. So I ended up cutting 2 black lines, putting a lug on the end of them so I could screw it into the body, and then the other longer wire that I end up soldering on to the back of the tone pot has to go through the body all the way around the trem springs and up to the trem claw, and to be soldered on the back of the trem claw, which you'll see here in a couple minutes. Step 15, first test of pickups. So before I close everything up, this is a really good chance before I put screws and stuff in where I can plug the body into an amp, and then I can take a screwdriver and tap each of the poles on the 3 pickups, and I should get an audible click or a pop on the amp, and you'll hear it. And so here I'm setting this up. If that happens as you cycle through the 5-position switch, then there's a really good chance that you've got it wired up properly. And I was really happy to find out that I was able to hear an audible pop for each of the pickups in the 3 positions where they're by themselves. And I was really happy because I thought that I had done a pretty good job on the wiring, and this was my first indication. Step 16, solder the trem ground wire. So you turn it over and you can see in this case that this had a ground wire attached to it before, but I want to route the wire properly so I'm not getting it bound up in the trem springs and so on. And so I grab it, and then I ended up turning up the soldering iron a little bit higher in temperature, primarily because it's cold in the garage, and it's actually going to take quite a bit to heat up this big old glob of solder. And once I get it flowing, then I can slide the ground wire onto it, and then I'm done with the wiring. I've actually completed the complete wiring of this, and everything pretty much seems to work so far. I haven't been able to plug it in, obviously, with a pair of strings. That'll be the ultimate test, but so far I get the audible pops when I test. But you can see I'm kind of stalling for time here because it does actually take a while for this big old glob of solder to finally heat up. But you can see it's starting to flow. I'm heating up the solder and the trem claw, and then pretty soon I'm going to be able to slide the wire into the hot solder and then let it cool on it, and pretty much done. So step 17, install screws for pickguard and input jack. Step 18, install the neck. So I got this used neck online. I paid, I think it was, I don't know, about $3.99 for it. It's off of the American Pro Series. I like them. You can get the rosewood fretboards, nice frets, and the large style headstock, which I kind of like. It fit in really, really tight with this body. And, you know, right away I could see that it was lined up with the holes. And so I went ahead and put the neck plate on, and then put some beeswax on the 4 screws. And then, just like I'm changing a tire, I installed the screws across from each other diagonal, and then tighten them in the same manner. Step 19, install accessory kit. Step 20, install the strings. Step 21, the first of many tunings. Step 22, measure and adjust truss relief. So this guitar, when I actually installed the neck, I actually found that I did not have enough relief. I usually don't find that. I basically put a capo at the first fret, held down the six string on the last fret, measured with a .006 feeler gauge, and ended up having to turn counterclockwise until I was able to fit the feeler gauge in properly. Took the capo off. Now I tune it up again. Step 23, tune again. So the reason you tune is between you do each of these measurements and adjustments, it's really important to have a baseline of having the guitar accurately tuned. Right now I'm tuning again, so next I can measure and adjust my string height. Step 24, measure and adjust string height. So I use my Music Nomad string height gauge, measuring for my 3 low strings for 1.50. The little line should come in just below the string, and then I adjust the saddle height either up or down to make sure the string comes into where it's supposed to be. On this guitar, I had to bring each of the saddles down pretty much across the board. On the 3 high strings, I'm measuring for 1.25, and again, you can see me here doing adjustments to saddle height to bring it into where it's supposed to actually be, when I measure with the string height gauge. Step 25, so I can measure and adjust intonation. Step 26, measure and adjust for an intonation. So I tune the guitar up again, and then I hold down on the 12th fret for each of the strings. I pluck the string, and I look to see where it is. If it's flat, meaning in this case my tuner is moving to the left, then I push the saddle forward. If it is sharp, meaning that it's turning to the right when I press, then I basically bring the saddle back. You do it in very small increments until you get it where it's spot on, it's not sharp, it's not flat, and it's the same as the note that when you pluck the string open, just a different octave as when you pluck the string when it's fretted at the 12th fret. Step 27, final tuning. Step 28, measure trem height. So I've actually gotten pretty good where I had set the trem claw distance and so on, and when I measured it right here, it was basically at a perfect 1/8, which is what it's supposed to be. So I didn't have to adjust anything at all. Step 29, install trem cover. Step 30, all done. Now I get to play with the guitar. So just cleaning up my bench and get to admire my work. You can see in the finish, if you look closely, you can see with the crackling in the finish. To me, that's kind of cool. It's nice aging and so on. Guitar really turned out beautifully. I'm really looking forward to playing this and seeing what it sounds like. Later on down the road, I thought about maybe having some sort of contest on the channel to give away guitars. I can absolutely guarantee you, though, that this one is going to stay on my collection and is one of mine that I'm going to keep. And, just basically that. I think it's like an old friend, comfortable and warm and definitely pretty. As always, thank you very much for viewing this video and going on this adventure with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. If you like this video, please click on like, subscribe, and notify.